Alright, spoilers right up front, but we got squid lovers, Jack Black, and Christopher Lloyd in an episode of Star Wars. What more could you want? I mean, I just wanted the squid lovers. The other stuff was just bonus. Hello, interwebs! I'm here to review the latest episode of Star Wars The Mandalorian, this time Chapter 22, Guns for Hire. And, oh boy, this is an interesting one for me, because this is another one of those, like, kind of stereotypical side quest episodes of The Mandalorian where, you know, we're trying to get to the next story beat, but then our characters sort of get distracted and have to go do a whole other adventure, then come back to the main story. And, you know, I do kind of enjoy those episodes of The Mandalorian where it's just sort of like, yeah, we're gonna go off and do our little side quest thing. And I do have fun with them, but on the one hand, I love a lot of the ideas in this episode. Like, they're basically doing a noirish detective story that I think is a really cool thing to do within the Star Wars universe. It kind of has, maybe not the tone of this, but kind of a Blade Runner-esque feel to it, in a way that, like, was kind of combining different elements of the Star Wars universe, specifically at this point in the Star Wars universe, that I really enjoyed. And then also a bunch of, like surprise little cameos. Like, again, Jack Black and Christopher Lloyd in this episode were a lot of fun. They had, like, some really great stuff for what they were doing. And so I enjoyed all of that, but if I'm being honest with you, there are a lot of ideas in this episode that I think were really, really cool and interesting, but unfortunately, because this is such a short episode that also is, like, bookended by sort of other sequences of the story, and we sort of only get, like, a really quick, brief time to explore this society and this story that they were telling, I'm ultimately left feeling a little bit disappointed and wanting more in a way that doesn't make me feel satisfied in a wanting more way, but more in a, like, I really think you could have spent a whole nother, like, 20-30 minutes exploring these ideas and this story and this setting that you're going for here in a way that I feel like leaves this story feeling really shallow. And I'm kind of sad about it. I'm not saying that it needed to be, like, some whole huge exploration and world building, but there's just elements here that I'm like, man, I just, this doesn't feel like you're thinking hard enough about some of the ideas that you're presenting. Like, I'm feeling like there's stuff left on the table that kind of irks me, unfortunately. So I'm kind of, like, torn on this episode, because I really like a lot of it. I'm not saying that I hate this episode. In fact, I just wish that we had gotten, like, 15 more minutes. This is one of the few episodes of The Mandalorian where I'm like, I really just wish we had more time to sit with this world, because I really feel like there was just so much more you could have done with the setting, because it was really cool and I loved seeing it, and I just feel like, man, you just kind of rushed by it so quickly that I just feel a little unsatisfied. Let's get into some of the nitty gritty with all of this, though. So I adored the opening, to be frank, where we get to see these like squid lovers and this, like, squid ship with the Mon Calamari, like, lover people. I adored all of that. It was cute, it was adorable, it was a quick little tale, Romeo and Juliet thing, and we get to sort of see what sort of the group that Bo-Katan was leading is doing now with this sort of Imperial Remnant fleet that they have with them. I really thought that that was very cool to see that, and I thought it was adorable. I am sort of, like, sitting here questioning, like, dang, they have a lot of, like, Imperial ships. Like, I guess it's not a Star Destroyer of, like, the size of a Star Destroyer, but they have, like, some big Imperial ships, so I was like, damn, that's kind of impressive. So, fun little opening. But then we sort of get to, I think the planet's called, like, Pfizer 15 or something like that, something along those lines. And we have Bo-Katan and Din, and also Grogu a little bit, and he just gets to have fun with the rulers of the planet, arrive on this planet, and we get to sort of explore this society. First and foremost, let's just say Jack Black, I adored seeing him. He was always fun. We got to see Bowser himself in this episode. Jack Black's just having a week between this and the Mario movie. And I liked seeing the kind of ostentatiousness of these elites. And I found it particularly interesting, a lot of, like, the little nuggets that we got to hear from the sort of, like, upper class society of this planet. Like, for one, Jack Black is part of the amnesty program, so he was a former Imperial, and now he still gets to kind of live in the high society. Like, we get this idea again of, he suffered so much under the Imperial, when he worked for the Imperials. And it's just one of those, like, I don't really believe you, and it feels like an act that he's putting on. And we also get this little nugget, too, of he's a royal and he's an elected leader. And we also learn that this is a direct democracy, so basically it means that every citizen gets to vote in the decisions on the planet. And that, all those little nuggets combined had me super fascinated with some of the implications of it, because you could say, well, maybe there's this sort of bias in the society of like, oh, these people have ruled us for so long, that we just keep going with it. It's sort of like this sort of like family lineage sort of thing. Don't want to rock the boat. But then also the Imperial Remnant aspect of it. So maybe he's sort of like manipulating people, or you could have just had it be like maybe he is a good guy. But like there's all those ideas and implications that you could have used to explore, like what does it mean for this society to still clearly have a class structure and yet be a direct democracy. And I found that to be so interesting of an idea, and yet there's not really a ton of exploration of it. It's just sort of a lot of stuff that's stated and said, but we don't really get any nuance within that. Like, is Jack Black's character a liar? Or is he, is he of face value? Can we trust him? Like, all of that stuff, I was just wishing there was these characters had a little bit more nuance beyond just the amazing performances that we were getting with them. Like, the actors were doing their best. Like, they were doing wonderfully, but the characters didn't have a lot of meat on their bones when I really feel like they could have, given the, like, very complex political structure that we got to see. And this kind of continues as we go into further exploration of this society, because we learn things like, well, they repurposed Imperial droids and old Clone Wars droids, and a lot of the people don't want to, like, they sort of, like, offshoot their labor to the droids, which I found, again, to be an interesting idea. But then when we get to see the droids, like, in the bar or whatever, the show doesn't really wrestle with, and again, this could have been a whole discussion, or a whole, like, and I know this isn't what this show is, but it just feels like there's not a lot of nuance, because there could have been a whole discussion on the droids being, like, this essentially slave labor class, and yet we kind of don't really ever wrestle with the droid problem that is inherent to all of Star Wars, in that, like, they are a slave labor class, and then, but they're clearly sentient, but then they're also droids and programmed for this. And the episode sort of dances around that, being like, oh, well, they're programmed with this, and there's, like, this Nepenthe stuff that sort of reprograms them and causes them to malfunction, potentially, but we just want to serve society, but they're also programmed for that. It's one of those things of Star Wars world building that you just kind of have to, like, either take at face value, like, these droids are just a thing that exists in this world and we're not going to address that, they're clearly sentient and yet also a worker class, or if you are going to address it, you need to actually address it. And yet this episode kind of wants to waffle in the middle of that, and as a result kind of leaves me feeling a little uncomfortable with the situation, because it's like, what does it mean that you have a society of people that clearly don't wish to reckon with, like, having to do, like, labor or work and just have this, like, slave labor class, essentially, but then that slave labor class is like, yeah, we want to work for society, and the only reason we're malfunctioning is because someone else was manipulating us. It's just one of those, like, there's no deeper message here, and it's not really reckoning with a lot of its ideas and its themes, and so just, again, this is where it just left me disappointed in a way that I'm like, if we had had more time here, instead of just trying to hit through the beats, we could have really explored this in an interesting way. And I hear myself saying all this, and I already know that some of you, maybe some of you out there, will be like, well, it's just meant to be a fun adventure, little moment. But I'm just sitting here being like, yeah, we can have a fun adventure, but if you're going to bring in all of these interesting ideas and then not say or do anything with them, but just have your, like, the aesthetic of a noir story, I'm gonna leave a little disappointed, especially since the rest of the season has actually done a really interesting job of exploring some of its political world building. And look, I'm not expecting the show to be on the level of Andor. Andor's, like, on another level when in terms of its understanding of political nuances. This is much more of a broad-based adventure show, but it's one that I just really wish was if it was going to address this stuff, that it would actually go into some nuance with it, and it leaves me disappointed. But some of the let me praise some of the elements here, because I'm being very negative, because I do like some elements of this. I do like seeing some of the things with Bo-Katan and Din, and I like their interpersonal back and forth, where Bo-Katan's very blunt, very much like, I'm gonna do this, I gotta get this done, and Din is actually the one who is able to sort of, like, have the on-the-ground sort of, like, streetwise knowledge of, like, knowing how to speak to certain species, like what helps them, and they kind of have this really good back and forth. They're two characters that I wouldn't necessarily have thought, like, they would be a good, like, sort of like team together, But seeing them function in this episode, I think actually was my favorite part of this, is getting to see them kind of going and doing different things. Like when they show up at the clone, or not the clone factory, the droid factory, and Din just sort of like messing with the droids and being like, you had me at droids, and just sort of fucking with them. And Bo-Katan just sort of like going and interviewing the guy. And that sort of leads to a really fun chase sequence, which I enjoyed the chase sequence. I thought all of that stuff was really, really great. So on an interpersonal level, in terms of like getting to see these two interact and bounce off of each other, I actually really adored that on a character level. And then I also will say that I did like seeing some of the aesthetic of the noir story. While the noir story wasn't exactly super deep, we only have a few suspects, a few people that it's possible could have done this thing. I did like some of the beats that they hit and some of the worlds that we got to see. Like the visuals of this were excellent, and some, again, the ideas of this were really cool, but they're I'm putting a but in, but again, it's just not explored as in depth as I would have wanted. But I do like the setup and the world and the character interactions quite a bit. This sort of brings us to the end of the episode, though, that sort of, again, moves our plot forward, where we get Bo-Katan sort of fighting to sort of gain back her crew, fighting the sort of lead dude there, and then something that I kind of had wondered about way back in, I think, episode 2 it was, where this happened, where sort of Din lost the Darksaber and she got to use it. I was wondering, like, does that mean that she owns it now? And I would have thought that would have been addressed then. But I'm glad that it does come back around here, and we sort of get this moment where Bo-Katan does get the Darksaber. I think maybe it does undercut it a tiny bit, in the sense that, like, the people that work for her don't get to see her earn the Darksaber. They just sort of get told it. And we see it, but it's like a few episodes later. Like, I wish there'd been some way for them to sort of write it where it sort of came in a more triumphant moment, because here it just sort of comes across as like, well, he just hands her the Darksaber, and there it goes. Like, it just feels like those two beats should have been more connected, so we would have felt the, like, celebratory moment of Bo-Katan getting to finally have the Darksaber, instead of it just being like yeah, here you go, now you have it now. It feels like a little distanced from each other. So structurally, that was just wonky for me, but I do like where it sets us up to go into the future. So yeah, I you know, having talked out and done my review of this episode, I guess I'm kind of lower on it than I was sort of thinking when I came down in to do this review. And then it's disappointing, because this is not an episode where I like hate everything or think it's like this is bad or trash. It's just more that there are so many ideas on the table here that I thought were really fascinating, but just were not given enough time and breadth to really explore them. And again, this is the adventure show, so I get that this is not going to be Andor. But if they are going to bring those elements to the table and sort of leave them left sort of in an unnuanced exploration, and in some ways kind of implying things that I find problematic, especially when it comes to the droids, then I'm just sort of left being a little bit wanting more. Oh, another thing, I did like Christopher Lloyd. I will say I found it interesting that he was the one that said, like, yeah, Count Dooku, he was a liberator and fighter. I'm like, I actually really like getting to learn more about the Separatist point of view. That was one element that we didn't really get to see from the movies, where the Separatists are just sort of like, yes, we're evil. And I'm like, but they actually do have some grievances against the Republic, because it did kind of fall into a fascistic empire. So maybe they weren't entirely without some point of view that was accurate, or at least feeling something accurate, but they're sort of like, nope, they're evil. So I like sort of seeing a little bit of nuance in live action, because we've gotten some in the animated stuff, but seeing some more nuance with them in live action was cool, and Christopher Lloyd getting to do it was great. But yeah, it's just one of those, like, too many good ideas, and I think you could have, like, maybe shaved off one or two of them, and the episode would have felt more concise and able to be more articulate in some of its ideas. So yeah, I don't hate the episode, but little left wanting more in a sort of disappointing way. But we did get squid lovers, so there's that. But beyond all of that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. But beyond that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.